Welcome to Ancient Mysteries. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode we journey into the shadows of ancient Mesopotamia to examine a record that defies reason and challenges the very framework of human history. The Sumerian King List doesn't just chronicle reigns, it speaks of rulers who lived for hundreds, even thousands of years. Could this be myth cloaked as history, or is there a deeper truth hidden in these ancient lines of cuneiform? In the cradle of civilization, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the ancient land of Sumer emerged over 5,000 years ago as one of humanity's first complex societies. This fertile region, part of what is now southern Iraq, gave rise to a network of city-states, Uruk, Eridu, and Lagash, each ruled by its own king and protected by its own patron deity. The Sumerians developed cuneiform writing, constructed monumental ziggurats, and laid the foundations of law, astronomy, and mathematics. Their achievements were vast, and yet even among their many innovations, one artifact stands apart in both content and tone: the Sumerian King List. Unlike simple dynastic records or chronological tables, the King List is an epic document that blends mythology with history. It exists in multiple copies and fragments, inscribed on clay tablets and stone prisms, the most complete of which, known as the Weld-Blundell Prism, now resides in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. This document offers a timeline of rulers, beginning in a pre-flood world and continuing through the dynasties of ancient Sumer. But it is not the names or the sequence of reigns that has confounded scholars. It is the incredible lifespans attributed to some of the earliest kings. The text begins with a declaration that kingship descended from heaven, followed by a list of 8 antediluvian kings who ruled for staggering lengths of time. Alulim, the first king of Eridu, is said to have reigned for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalngar, ruled for 36,000. The third king, Enmenlu-Ana of Bad Tabira, ruled for 43,200 years. In total, the 8 pre-flood kings are described as ruling for a combined 241,200 years. These reigns end abruptly with the line, "Then the flood swept over," after which the lifespans return to more believable but still lengthy durations, often ranging from hundreds to over 1,000 years. The document's structure raises compelling questions. It treats both mythic and historical kings with equal authority, weaving a narrative that does not distinguish between divine rule and human governance. Later entries include kings like Gilgamesh, whose deeds are immortalized in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but who is also believed by many scholars to have been a real figure. The list continues down through dynasties we can verify archaeologically, including kings of Akkad, Ur, and Isin. The Sumerians themselves seem to accept these records as legitimate. In their worldview, kingship was a sacred trust handed down from the gods. Rulers were often seen as divine or semi-divine figures, intermediaries between the heavens and the earth. Time itself, in their cosmology, did not always behave as we understand it today. The calendar was governed by celestial rhythms, and the concept of divine time may have permitted reigns measured in millennia rather than decades. To dismiss the King List as mere mythology is to overlook the context in which it was written. The Sumerians were not casually inventing stories. They were documenting what they considered to be the official chronicle of civilization's divine stewardship. Their temples were archives of cosmic order, and their scribes were recorders of both divine will and historical fact. The result is a record that forces us to confront not only what we believe about history, but what the ancients believed about reality itself. The mystery at the heart of the Sumerian King List lies in the numbers, those implausibly vast spans of time attached to rulers who predate the Great Flood. In the early section of the text, reigns are measured in sars, with 1 sar equal to 3,600 years. When Alulim is said to have ruled for 8 sars, that equates to 28,800 years. The second king, Alalngar, ruled for 10 sars, or 36,000 years. These durations are not anomalies. They are systematic. Each ruler before the flood is assigned a reign calculated in sars and near 600 years, revealing an intentional structure to the chronology rather than random exaggeration. This suggests the use of a mathematical framework with religious or cosmological meaning. The King List follows a pattern that is strikingly consistent with other ancient traditions. In the Hebrew Bible, the book of Genesis outlines similarly long lifespans among the antediluvian patriarchs. Methuselah is said to have lived 969 years, Adam lives 930, Jared 962. These ages, like those in the King List, drop significantly after a cataclysmic flood. In ancient Hindu cosmology, the yugas, cosmic ages, are measured in tens or hundreds of thousands of years. The Dvapara Yuga, for example, is said to last 864,000 years. The parallels across these cultures, separated by geography but united in theme, raise a compelling question. Were these ages symbolic representations of spiritual status or celestial influence, or did they reflect something the ancients believed was literal? The idea of impossibly long-lived rulers also appears in Egyptian and Greek mythology. The Egyptian Sumerian King List contains names of gods and demigods who ruled before the first pharaohs, while Greek legends speak of golden and silver ages where gods walked among men. In these eras, time behaves differently, bending to divine will or cosmic harmony. In this light, the Sumerian King List may be part of a larger pattern, a memory of an earlier world, governed not just by kings, but by beings closer to the divine. Archaeologically, the earliest cities mentioned in the list, Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, do correspond to real locations uncovered in southern Mesopotamia. Eridu, in particular, is recognized as one of the earliest urban centers in human history, dating back to the Ubaid period around 5400 BCE. Temples and artifacts found at the site support its reputation as a religious and cultural hub. The temple of Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water, stood at its center, possibly the very location from which the Sumerians believed kingship descended from heaven. The abrupt transition in the King List from reigns of tens of thousands of years to far more plausible historical figures after the flood adds another layer of complexity. This demarcation echoes a break in human memory, a veil between two ages. In this framework, the flood isn't just a story of divine punishment. It serves as a dividing line between a time when gods ruled directly and a world now governed by mortal men. This shift is not only temporal, but spiritual. The Sumerian King List seems to imply that humanity's earliest rulers were not ordinary men, but beings connected to cosmic forces, gatekeepers of divine order. Whether the vast lifespans are intended as metaphors for wisdom, spiritual potency, or actual chronology remains unresolved. But the careful way in which these numbers are recorded, precise, structured, and consistent, suggests they were meant to be taken seriously. Whether they describe symbolic ages, misunderstood calendars, or a forgotten epoch of human history, the numbers endure, carved in clay defying modern explanations. Physical evidence of the Sumerian King List comes primarily from cuneiform tablets and prisms, most notably the Weld Blundell prism, discovered in the early 20th century at the ancient site of Larsa. This four-sided clay prism, inscribed in cuneiform script, contains the most complete version of the list, recording over 140 kings and spanning multiple dynasties. Dated to the early 2nd millennium BCE, the prism measures just under 8 inches in height, yet it compresses what appears to be an account of thousands of years of rule. Other versions of the King List have been recovered from sites such as Nippur, Sippar and Ur, each with slight variations but consistent in the inclusion of the long-reigning antediluvian kings. Beyond the tablets themselves, some archaeological discoveries seem to align with names and cities mentioned in the King List. The city of Eridu, regarded by the Sumerians as the first city ever created, has been extensively excavated. Archaeologists uncovered layers of occupation reaching deep into prehistory, with evidence of temple structures that predate the invention of writing. Among these is the Iab-Zu, a temple dedicated to Enki, a god closely associated with knowledge, water, and creation. Its presence lends weight to Eridu's mythic stature as the birthplace of civilization and the seat of early divine kingship. The city of Uruk, home to the legendary king Gilgamesh, has also yielded substantial archaeological evidence. Its ziggurat, temples, and city walls stand as a testament to early urban engineering and religious devotion. Clay tablets from Uruk detail administrative records, economic transactions, and literary texts, including versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Though Gilgamesh himself is often viewed as a mythic hero, The King List presents him as a historical monarch who reigned for 126 years, far longer than any normal human lifespan, but far shorter than the reigns attributed to the pre-flood kings. The juxtaposition of myth and material culture is one of the King List's most intriguing aspects. Names found on the list reappear in literature, hymns and royal inscriptions, blurring the line between legend and lived reality. While the reigns of the earliest kings strain credulity, the cities, dynasties and many rulers that follow the flood are supported by independent records, clay tablets, royal decrees, building inscriptions and tombs. In this way, the list serves not just as a mythological document, but as a chronological scaffold tying together the fragments of Sumerian history. One particularly enigmatic figure is Etana, described as the shepherd who ascended to heaven and consolidated all the foreign lands. Etana appears both in the King List and in Mesopotamian myth, where he is said to have ridden an eagle to the heavens in search of the plant of birth to cure his wife's infertility. His presence on both the historical and mythological stage mirrors the dual nature of the King List itself, neither fully history nor wholly myth, but a fusion of both. That this narrative was recorded alongside royal chronologies suggests that the Sumerians saw no contradiction in placing the miraculous alongside the mundane. Physical evidence alone cannot resolve the mystery of the long reigns. No graves have been found that match the mythical ages. No inscriptions independently verify a king ruling for tens of thousands of years. Yet the tablets exist, carefully etched, copied across centuries, and preserved in sacred archives. Their survival suggests reverence, perhaps even fear, of the knowledge they contained. Whether literal or symbolic, the King List was treated as a serious document, not a casual myth. And in that seriousness lies the enduring puzzle. What truth, if any, did the Sumerians believe they were recording? Among academic circles, the Sumerian King List has long sparked intense debate. Most scholars view it as a remarkable literary and political document, one that blends real history with ideological myth. In this interpretation, the exaggerated lifespans of the early kings are not to be taken literally, but symbolically, representing divine favour, mythical time, or the grandeur of an idealized past. The list, in their view, was crafted as a tool for legitimizing dynasties by creating a continuous lineage that reached back to divine origins. By anchoring new rulers in an ancient framework of god-kings and heroic figures, the list bolstered political authority with the weight of tradition and cosmic order. The notion of kingship descending from heaven is seen not as a historical claim, but as a theological one, asserting that leadership is a divine mandate. In Mesopotamian culture, the king was not merely a political figure, but also a religious one, responsible for maintaining order between the human world and the realm of the gods. By presenting early kings as figures with impossibly long reigns, the list may have aimed to emphasize their closeness to divine perfection, rather than their physical longevity. Historian Thorkild Jacobsen, one of the foremost experts on Mesopotamian literature, argued that the antediluvian section of the list represents a mythologized prehistory, an era of divine rule that existed before the true beginning of human time. In this framework, the flood functions as a dividing line between a mythical past and historical reality. Jacobsen suggested that the long reigns served as markers of an era where different laws of time and existence applied, much like the Golden Age myths found in other ancient cultures. Other scholars have focused on the structure and numerical patterns within the text. The use of base 60 numeration, known as the sexagesimal system, was central to Sumerian mathematics and timekeeping. Some researchers believe the reign lengths may have been based on complex calendrical calculations, rituals, or astrological cycles that we no longer fully understand. The choice to encode these reigns in sars, or units of 3,600 years, hints at an astronomical or sacred numerology rather than a straightforward historical record. Still, the transition in the King List from mythic reigns to historically verifiable rulers is difficult to ignore. Kings such as Sargon of Akkad, who ruled in the 24th century BCE and founded one of the world's first empires, appear on later versions of the list. His reign, confirmed through inscriptions and archaeological evidence, lasts a mere 56 years. By this point in the text, the lifespans return to a more believable range, suggesting that the list does eventually conform to real-world chronology. This merging of myth and history complicates any simplistic reading. The King List is not a hoax or fiction in the traditional sense. It reflects a world-view where the sacred and historical are woven together, where storytelling and fact exist on a spectrum. The Sumerians did not draw hard lines between myth and reality as we do today. Instead, their understanding of the past included gods, monsters, floods, and miracles, all part of a continuous narrative that explained not just what happened, but why the world is the way it is. To modern scholars, the King List is thus a document of cultural memory. It preserves not only the names of rulers and the cities they governed, but also the values, beliefs, and cosmology of an ancient people. While it may not offer a literal record of kings who lived for tens of thousands of years, it offers something just as valuable, a window into how early civilizations perceived time, authority, and the divine. In this view, the King List is a sacred ledger, not of dates and events, but of a civilization's spiritual architecture. Yet even with its poetic structure and theological symbolism, the Sumerian King List refuses to rest entirely within the boundaries of accepted scholarship. The very precision of its figures, its deliberate use of numerical patterns and the specificity with which it records each king's reign has led many to question whether there might be deeper truths buried beneath its allegorical surface. Critics of the conventional academic view argue that dismissing the King List's vast reigns as metaphor overlooks a more unsettling possibility, that the ancients were recording something real, but from a world whose physics, lifespans, and consciousness were fundamentally different from ours. One of the most contentious aspects of the list is its consistency across sources. While minor variations exist in names and dynasties, the early, antediluvian kings and their astounding reign lengths appear again and again. Unlike folklore that tends to morph wildly over time and geography, these records show uniformity, almost as if preserving data rather than myth. That consistency suggests transmission of knowledge rather than invention. Why would multiple cities over centuries copy the same numerical data if they understood it to be nothing more than figurative storytelling? There is also the question of intent. These tablets weren't discovered in the ruins of temples dedicated to storytelling. They were found in administrative and state archives, places where land deeds, tax records, and civic documents were stored. The Sumerians treated their king lists with the same reverence and archival discipline as they did economic records. This placement suggests a belief in their authenticity, or at least their authoritative significance. Even in later periods, scribes continued to replicate and preserve the list, updating it with newer dynasties but leaving the earliest, impossibly long reigns untouched. Some researchers, uncomfortable with the prevailing explanations, propose that the numbers may be remnants of an ancient mathematical code, one whose key has been lost to time. They point to the use of sars and nurs not as inflated numbers, but as components of a calendrical system used to measure epochs, not lifespans. According to this theory, the reigns could signify cosmic cycles, dynastic ages, or shifts in the precession of the equinoxes, rather than individual years of rule. In this interpretation, Alulim's 28,800-year reign may represent a complete astronomical cycle, not a literal lifespan. More provocative are the views of those who question whether our assumptions about ancient humanity's capabilities, and even nature, are fundamentally flawed. Could there have been a period in remote antiquity when the human body, or something resembling it, lived far longer? Some point to modern biological research on genetic longevity, cellular regeneration, and telomeres, the protective caps at the end of chromosomes linked to aging, as evidence that lifespan is a flexible trait, not a fixed one. While it stretches credulity, the idea that early humans, or entities mistaken for humans, once lived vastly longer lives isn't entirely outside the realm of speculative science. Then there is the idea that the earliest kings weren't human in the way we define the term. Some Mesopotamian myths speak of beings who came from the stars, descending to teach humanity the arts of civilization, agriculture, law, and language. These figures, often associated with the Anunnaki, are portrayed not merely as deities but as rulers and engineers. If such beings did exist, either as metaphors for advanced knowledge or as literal non-human entities, then the reigns recorded in the King List might not be exaggerations, but testimonies to something wholly beyond our modern framework. These interpretations are controversial, even among alternative historians. But their persistence reflects a simple truth. The King List continues to challenge the limits of our imagination. Whether it encodes a forgotten science, a sacred numerology, or the memory of something unclassifiable, its very existence forces us to ask whether our view of history has overlooked entire dimensions of the past, realities that refuse to be boxed into myth or fact alone. Within the broader landscape of speculative interpretations, few ideas have ignited as much controversy or fascination as the connection between the Sumerian King List and the ancient astronaut hypothesis. According to this theory, the incredible reigns recorded in the King List are not symbolic or poetic, but literal. The durations of lifespans not of human kings, but of extraterrestrial beings who came to Earth in remote antiquity. Proponents suggest that the Sumerians did not invent tales of gods descending from heaven, but rather recorded real encounters with advanced visitors, beings whose physiology and technology allowed them to live, rule, and shape civilization for millennia. Central to this hypothesis is the figure of the Anunnaki, a group of deities in the Sumerian pantheon often associated with divine authority, judgment, and control over human affairs. The name Anunnaki roughly translates to those who came from heaven to earth. In Mesopotamian texts, these beings are frequently portrayed as powerful, godlike figures who descended from the sky to establish order, bestow knowledge, and supervise humanity. While mainstream scholars interpret these myths through a religious or allegorical lens, ancient astronaut theorists take the texts at face value, viewing the Anunnaki as literal sky beings, possibly extraterrestrials. Zecharia Sitchin, one of the most prominent voices in this fringe theory, argued that the Sumerians were not inventing myths, but documenting historical events distorted by time and translation. In his controversial Earth Chronicles series, Sitchin proposed that the Anunnaki came from a distant planet called Nibiru, whose elongated orbit brings it into Earth's proximity every 3,600 years, a cycle that just happens to match the Sumerian unit of measurement known as a Sa. According to his interpretation, the incredible reign lengths of the early kings align with the time frames of Anunnaki presence on Earth. Critics of Sitchin's work have pointed out numerous translation errors and speculative leaps, particularly his reading of cuneiform texts. Mainstream Assyriologists have repeatedly stated that the term Anunnaki never referred to spacefaring beings, and that the planet Nibiru is a mythological construct, not a celestial body. Yet despite academic refutation, the theory persists, buoyed by popular culture and the enduring appeal of ancient mysteries framed as cosmic truths. Others within the speculative realm take a more symbolic approach, suggesting that the King List records the interventions of a forgotten advanced civilization, possibly originating on Earth itself, but now lost to cataclysm or time. These theories draw parallels with Plato's Atlantis or the Vedic accounts of flying machines and godlike beings. In this view, the long-lived kings were not aliens, but members of a technologically and spiritually superior civilization whose influence was later mythologized. More esoteric interpretations view the King List as a record of consciousness itself, of beings existing in a higher vibrational state, capable of perceiving time differently. In this model, the long reigns are not measures of solar years, but indicators of experiential time, accessible only to those in altered or non-material states. The kings may have been seen as avatars, divine incarnations, who operated outside the limitations of human mortality. Still others propose that the King List encodes astronomical or cosmological data, records of planetary alignments, precessional cycles, or shifts in the Earth's axis. The flood in this context represents not just a literal inundation, but a celestial event that reset time and consciousness. The long reigns might mark epochs defined by planetary movements rather than personal rule. In such a framework, the King List becomes a metaphysical chronometer, measuring not history but the rhythm of the universe as perceived by ancient minds. These fringe theories, though widely disputed, underscore a deep truth about the King List. It continues to resist reduction to any single explanation. Whether viewed as divine mythology, ancient political propaganda, or a cryptic log of cosmic intervention, it occupies a liminal space between the known and the unknowable. And in that space, speculation flourishes, not because the facts are clear, but because they remain forever just out of reach. Beneath the debate over the literal or symbolic nature of the Sumerian King List lies a deeper question. What does this artifact reveal about how ancient civilizations understood time, authority, and the structure of the cosmos? Beyond the numbers, names, and myths, the list stands as a cultural document of profound psychological and philosophical depth. It speaks not only to how the Sumerians viewed their rulers, but how they perceived the relationship between humanity, divinity, and history itself. In the Sumerian worldview, kingship was not merely a social contract or hereditary right, it was a sacred duty bestowed from the heavens. The phrase, kingship descended from heaven, appears not once but twice in the King List, first before the flood and again after. This phrase is not poetic flourish. It reflects a foundational belief that civilization itself was a divine gift, granted to humans by higher powers who deemed them ready or in need of order. Rule, then, was not negotiated. It was divinely mandated. A king was not just a political figure, but a cosmic node, a vessel through which celestial order flowed into the human realm. This belief system gave rulers an aura of spiritual authority and may explain why early kings were believed to possess supernatural longevity. Their extended reigns weren't just symbols of greatness, they were evidence of their alignment with divine time. In this system, time itself was layered. There was ordinary time, marked by days, harvests, and human aging, and then there was sacred time, in which the rhythms of gods and cosmic cycles unfolded. The early kings, especially those before the flood, were believed to inhabit that sacred time, existing on a different temporal plane entirely. The flood itself, mentioned in both the King List and multiple other Mesopotamian texts, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, serves as more than just a historical or mythical event. It marks a rupture in the spiritual continuity between gods and humans. Before the flood, kings lived among the divine, often ruling for thousands of years. After the flood, kingship resumed, but the magic of the earlier era had diminished. Lifespans shortened. Human frailty became the norm. The flood is thus symbolic of a fall, a descent from a golden age into a world of limitation and mortality. This shift mirrors archetypes found in other ancient traditions: the banishment from Eden, the end of the Satya Yuga in Hinduism, the loss of innocence in Greek mythology. In each, humanity is portrayed as descending from a state of unity with the divine into one of separation, conflict, and decay. The Sumerian King List encodes this archetypal journey in its structure. It starts with divine kingship, plunges into catastrophe, and emerges into a world that feels recognizably human, imperfect, fragile, and finite. The list also reflects how the Sumerians conceptualized the flow of history. It was not linear in the modern sense, but cyclical, punctuated by great cosmic events and periods of renewal. The appearance of the flood as a dividing line, the periodic emergence of new dynasties, and the repetition of certain sacred phrases all suggest a worldview in which time was a spiral, not a straight line. Kings came and went, civilizations rose and fell, but divine order, however veiled, remained constant. In this context, the King List becomes not just a chronicle of rulers, but a meditation on impermanence and divine will. It tells us that the Sumerians believed history had a purpose beyond politics or conquest. It was a story of sacred transmission, of how the heavens once walked among men, and how their legacy was preserved in the names of those who ruled not merely as men, but as intermediaries between the cosmic and the terrestrial. It's a view of history that is not about remembering the past, but about reconnecting to something higher that was once lost. Taken as a whole, the Sumerian King List offers an astonishing convergence of myth, memory, and meaning. Its survival through centuries of political upheaval and cultural transformation underscores the reverence with which it was held. Across copies and fragments, scribes faithfully reproduced not only the names and durations of reigns, but also the phrasing, sequences, and divine framing that made the list more than a historical record. It was a statement of cosmic legitimacy. In the minds of the Sumerians and their successors, kingship was not just continuous, it was eternal, passed like a sacred fire from one ruler to the next. The list's most compelling features, the extraordinary reign lengths, the delineation of a flood event, the return of kingship from heaven, serve as interpretive anchors, giving structure to the narrative of human civilization from its divine inception to its earthly manifestation. The massive timescales attached to the earliest kings draw attention not just for their improbability, but for their coherence. They don't appear arbitrary. The use of stars and structured numerical intervals points toward a worldview rooted in sacred numbers, where time itself was measured differently depending on proximity to the divine. That idea is echoed in traditions around the world, from the ancient Vedic yugas to the biblical ages of patriarchs to the mythic eras of ancient Greece. What's most fascinating is how seamlessly the king list transitions from mythic to verifiable history. By the time we reach the dynasties of Ur, Isin, and Larsa, the names listed can be corroborated by inscriptions, tablets, and royal monuments. Kings like Ur-Nammu and Shulgi of Ur are well attested in administrative texts, building dedications, and law codes. Their reigns fall within plausible human lifespans, and their deeds, wars waged, temples built, decrees issued, form the tangible framework of Mesopotamian political life. Yet the king list offers no disclaimer, no point of separation between the kings who supposedly ruled for 36,000 years and those who governed for 30. It treats them all with the same narrative weight. That blending of the miraculous with the mundane is precisely what gives the list its enduring power. It challenges modern historians, theologians, and philosophers alike by refusing to separate the spiritual from the historical. In doing so, it reflects a cultural reality in which myth and history were not opposites, but layers of the same truth. The ancient Sumerians were not merely trying to preserve who ruled and when. They were preserving a cosmological structure, an expression of how the universe itself unfolded through time. This fusion raises difficult questions. If parts of the list can be verified through archaeology while others cannot, where do we draw the line between myth and fact? If a document records real cities, real kings, and real events, interspersed with supernatural lifespans and divine origins, how do we interpret its more fantastical claims? Do we dismiss them as invention, or do we acknowledge the possibility that the ancients perceived reality in a fundamentally different way? Even more provocative is the question of intent. If the king list was an act of myth-making, it was one constructed with extraordinary care and precision. If it was an act of record-keeping, then it was one that included realms we no longer recognize as valid. Either way, the list reflects an intellect not only concerned with chronology, but with coherence, a desire to present history as a sacred pattern, not merely a sequence of dates. It is this aspect that continues to resonate, the sense that hidden beneath the clay tablets and ancient symbols is a worldview as complex and mysterious as the numbers it preserves. A worldview that may not just remember the past, but remember something lost. In the end, the Sumerian King List stands as more than just a relic of ancient administration or an artifact of religious tradition. It is a mirror held up to humanity's oldest and most enduring questions. How did civilization begin? Who were our first leaders? What role did the divine play in shaping our destiny? Etched in cuneiform and preserved across millennia, the list doesn't offer definitive answers. Instead, it poses an enigma, cloaked in the authority of sacred text and sealed in the language of myth, challenging every assumption we hold about the origins of history. The list's unwavering tone, its refusal to distinguish the impossible from the possible, its seamless inclusion of godlike figures alongside archaeologically verified kings, creates a tension that refuses to dissolve. It forces us to confront the limitations of modern historical interpretation. In the world that produced this document, the sacred was not metaphorical, and history was not a flat progression of cause and effect. Events were layered with divine intention, and rulers carried the weight not just of governance, but of cosmic alignment. The kings of old were not just men, they were living links in a chain connecting heaven to earth. Perhaps that is why the king list continues to stir modern imagination. It whispers of a time when memory was not data but mystery, when to rule was to be chosen by the stars, when floods were not geological events but spiritual resets. Whether or not kings once ruled for 36,000 years may be beside the point. The deeper message of the King List may be this: that history in its purest form is not merely a record of what happened, it is a map of how civilizations understood their place in the universe. This idea challenges us in profound ways. It suggests that our ancestors weren't simply mistaken about time or deceived by myth. Instead, they may have lived within a paradigm where the boundaries between human and divine, real and symbolic, were fluid and alive. In their world, a ruler could reign for millennia because time moved differently near the gods. Sacred numbers encoded more than chronology. They reflected cosmic order, celestial rhythms, the architecture of reality itself. That perspective doesn't fit easily into modern frameworks of history or science, but it doesn't need to. The Sumerian King List invites us to entertain a different kind of truth, one that is less about proof and more about meaning, a truth that recognizes myth as memory, numbers as symbols, and rulers as reflections of a deeper, unseen structure governing the rise and fall of civilizations. We will likely never know whether Alulim ruled for 28,800 years, or whether kingship truly descended from heaven in a literal sense. But the persistence of that idea, preserved in clay for over 4,000 years, tells us something profound about the people who wrote it. They were reaching for eternity, seeking to anchor their fleeting human world to something eternal. In doing so, they left us a puzzle we are still trying to solve, a puzzle not just of kings and reigns, but of how humanity once saw itself in relation to the divine. Thanks for listening. This has been Ancient Mysteries. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.